What kind of church do you go to? And what would Jesus want to change? And we have a call to evaluate the church. Not that we don't love our church. Don't get me wrong. But it starts inwardly too. In Corinthians chapter 13, verse 5, examine yourselves to see whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves. So it starts with inner reflection because we are the church. And then 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 17 says, "For it is time for judgment to begin at the household of God. And it begins with us. What will the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God?" So these verses remind us that self-examination is not optional. We're called to do it. It's essential. And before we examine the world or even others, we must look inward, both personally and as a church body. We need to examine the church. So Jesus calls us to do that. He's holding up a mirror to his bride. And I know some people might be apprehensive about that, about examining the churches, because we hold our church dear to our heart. My church is my family, but the scripture calls us to examine. And not only that, we are called to please God, not man. So even though it might ruffle a few feathers, we're ultimately to be obedient to Christ, not any man, but to Christ. Galatians chapter 1, verse 10 says, "For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ." 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4 says, "But just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak, not to please man, but to please God, who tests our heart." Again, we're to be obedient to Christ. And when Christ calls us to do things, we do it, whether or not our church buddies want us to do those things. So we want to examine our churches, and thankfully we can turn to the scripture to do that.